I found out my sister was selling our childhood home from a stranger's Instagram story. Not a phone call, not even a text. Just a shaky video of a historic estate auction this Saturday, tagged with the address I knew by heart, 124, Pine Hollow Road. The porch swing we'd both fallen off at age 7 was barely visible in the background. My name is Anna, and I'm 31. I don't cry easily, not anymore. But I stood in my office that afternoon with my hands trembling, the screen blurring in front of me. The caption read, "Perfect for renovators and developers." Huge lot. No mention of the rose garden our grandmother planted the summer after her stroke. No note about the narrow attic closet where we used to play hide and seek. Just potential for development. I hadn't set foot inside that house in over a year, not since Mom passed. After the funeral, Claire and I made a quiet pact to take our time deciding what to do with the property. She'd even said it herself, in the kind of hushed voice people use when grief is still raw, "Let's not rush. It still feels like Mom's in the walls." But then, Claire stopped returning my calls. Said she was busy with work. That she wasn't up for talking about it yet. And I, like a fool, respected her boundaries. Until now. My first instinct was to drive straight there, but something in me, that voice I've had since childhood, the one that tells me to wait, to observe, to measure twice, told me to pause. Instead, I called our mother's lawyer. He sounded surprised to hear from me. "Oh, Anna. I assumed you knew. Your sister filed for sole executorship 6 months ago." I sat down slowly, the weight of the phone like a stone in my hand. "That's not possible. We were co-executors. We agreed." "She filed a petition stating you'd relinquished your claim," he said. "I never signed anything." "I'm afraid she submitted a notarized statement," he continued, his tone suddenly careful. "Claiming you did, in fact, sign." That's when something broke inside me, not from shock, but from the terrible confirmation of what I'd suspected for a long time. Claire wasn't just overwhelmed. She wasn't grieving too hard to return my calls. She was planning. Strategizing. Lying. What she hadn't counted on was that I'd been quietly collecting things, even before I realized I needed them. Emails. Copies of our mother's will. A photo of the last signed agreement between us. Everything in its place. I didn't intend to hijack the auction. Not at first. But I could feel something cold and deliberate rising in me, a version of myself I hadn't touched in years. The version that gets very, very still when someone crosses a line that shouldn't be crossed. Because this wasn't just a house. This was our history. And if she thought she could erase me from it, she'd underestimated the wrong sister. I drove to Pine Hollow the next morning under a dull gray sky. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint more chipped, the windows dirtier. But it was still ours. I parked down the street and watched men in suits walk up the driveway with clipboards and polished shoes. Developers. Flippers. Investors. They moved through the front gate like they already owned it. I stayed in the car until I saw her. Claire. Standing on the porch in black wool and a forced smile, shaking hands with the auctioneer. She didn't see me. She hadn't seen me in a long time. But I was about to make sure she did. Claire hadn't seen me in a long time, not really. Not as a threat, not as someone who could undo her with a sentence. But I knew things about that house she didn't. Things she'd long since forgotten. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the porch like I had every right to be there. Because I did. No one stopped me, not at first. The men with clipboards were too busy inspecting window frames and muttering about structural potential. Claire was talking to a man in a dark trench coat when she finally turned and spotted me. Her eyes flickered. Just a flicker, quick and subtle, but enough. It told me everything I needed to know. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. I just walked past her into the house. The air inside was stale, tinged with dust and old flowers. Some of the furniture was still there, the glass-fronted cabinet, our mother's upholstered chair, the faint outline of where the rug used to be. I ran my fingers along the molding by the stairs. Scratches were still visible where we used to mark our heights every birthday. My last mark was 3 inches above Claire's. She hated that. In the hallway, the wallpaper was peeling. I remembered helping Mom pick it out. Pale green with tiny gold birds. Claire had been bored that day, playing on her phone, rolling her eyes. I'd stayed 2 hours after, helping Mom measure and paste until the paper lay flat and perfect. That was the difference between us. Claire remembered the house as a burden. I remembered it as a promise. I walked into the kitchen, my heels soft on the worn linoleum. Someone had cleared the counter. The calendar was still pinned to the side of the fridge. February, a year ago. A photo of Mom and me in the garden, both of us in sun hats, holding coffee mugs. Claire wasn't in that picture. She wasn't in many. When she finally entered the room, she leaned against the doorframe with studied calm. Her posture was deliberate. Elegant. Detached. She said, "This isn't a good time, Anna." I didn't answer. She said, "You weren't supposed to be here." I turned and looked at her, steady and still. Her necklace, the one Mom left to me in the will, was around her neck. "You filed false documents," I said. Her face didn't change. "It's done. You forged my signature." Still no expression. She'd always been good at pretending things hadn't happened, even when they were unraveling in real time. "I have the original papers," I said. "The will. The notarized agreement. The emails. All of it." She crossed her arms, tilting her head like I'd amused her. She said, "You're going to make a scene." I almost laughed. Claire didn't understand me at all. "No," I replied. "I'm going to walk through every room of this house. And then I'm going to decide what I want to do." I turned away before she could respond. In the dining room, the chandelier was missing a bulb. The long table was gone, but the indentations in the carpet remained. I traced one with my toe. I could still hear Mom's voice echo in that room, her soft corrections when Claire interrupted, her gentle teasing when I sat too straight. She had a way of balancing us, even when we didn't realize it. She made things feel whole. Even when we weren't. I walked upstairs slowly, hand on the railing. The second floor smelled like lavender and furniture polish, like time had pressed itself into the walls. Claire's old room was closed. I didn't open it. Instead, I went into mine. The paint had faded, but my books were still on the shelf. The ones I'd packed away but couldn't bring myself to take. Jane Austen, Joan Didion, the same yellow-spined psychology textbook I read at 17 to understand our family better. The bed was stripped. A mattress covered in plastic. But the window was still mine. The view of the garden. The swing. The old oak tree with the knot in its trunk where we buried the time capsule. I knelt at the window and looked down. Someone had trimmed the roses. Roughly. Carelessly. It felt like a slap. Back downstairs, the auctioneer was preparing to start. People were gathering, whispering, scribbling notes. I stood in the hallway and watched them. Their casual disinterest. Their calculations. They didn't know that this was the house where I learned to braid my own hair. Where I first read the will Mom left under the low hum of a floor fan. Where I watched Claire lie to our father about broken china and took the blame because I didn't want the noise. This was not a building. It was a history. I didn't say anything as Claire passed me, her face composed. But I followed her outside, past the porch, down the steps, through the garden path. I stopped beside the oak tree and looked at the ground. A small marker was still there, rusted, worn. But there. She walked past me like she didn't notice it. But I remembered. She had buried something there, too. Something stupid and sentimental when we were 9 and 10. A friendship bracelet. A note. A photo. Things we promised we'd never forget. Things she clearly had. That's when I decided. I wasn't going to stop the auction with a scream. Or a lawyer. Or a threat. I was going to stop it with the truth. Because Claire had forged signatures. But I had something better. Something she didn't know I'd kept. Something no one expected me to still have. And I was about to make sure everyone saw it. Some betrayals don't scream when they happen. They echo later, in quiet rooms, when you realize what's been taken. And what can still be taken if you don't stop it. I left the garden before the bidding began. I needed time, not much, just enough to slow the pace of what was unfolding. The lawyer I'd contacted the night before hadn't returned my call, but I knew him. Knew how he operated. Knew that once I gave him a reason to act, he wouldn't hesitate. I parked at the cafe 3 blocks away. It was empty, the kind of place that played quiet jazz and served strong coffee in ceramic mugs. I sat in the back corner, where no one could see my screen. I opened the manila folder I'd carried in my bag for months. Inside was a letter dated 6 months before Mom's death. Her handwriting was neat, deliberate, the kind she only used when something mattered. To whom it may concern, it began, in the event of any legal misrepresentation regarding the sale or inheritance of my property at 124 Pine Hollow Road, please refer to the attached video and my final written instructions. My daughters, Anna and Claire, are co-executors of this estate and must act in agreement. Any decision made unilaterally is invalid. Attached was a USB drive. I'd found it in Mom's dresser the week after her funeral. The envelope had my name on it in red ink. Claire never saw it. I hadn't shown anyone. I hadn't even watched the video until the night before last, when I felt something shift in me. The sense that whatever Claire had been planning was already in motion. I slid the USB into my laptop now. Watched the screen come to life. There she was. Mom sat on the sunroom couch in the soft blue cardigan she wore on good days. Her voice was thin but steady. "If you're seeing this," she said, "then something has gone wrong." She talked about the house. About the will. About her fears, that grief would divide us, that entitlement would mask as necessity. She never said Claire's name, but her meaning was clear. I knew it would hold up in court. Her attorney had once told me that digital testimony, when backed by a notarized letter, carried weight. But that wasn't the part that broke me. Near the end of the video, she looked directly at the camera and said my name. "Anna. I trust you to do what's right. Not what's easy. Not what's polite. What's right." My hands were steady as I clicked upload. The video wouldn't go viral, that wasn't the point. I sent it directly to the lawyer, along with the documents, and marked it urgent. I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. That afternoon, the calls began. The lawyer called first, sharp and focused. He confirmed the documents, reviewed the video, and said, "She has no legal standing for a unilateral sale. We'll freeze the process immediately." I thanked him and hung up. My fingers hovered over Claire's name in my phone. I didn't call her. Let her feel what silence tastes like. Let her sit in it. That evening, I returned to the house. The auction was over. The chairs were gone. So were the strangers. Claire's car was still parked out front. I didn't go inside. Instead, I walked around the perimeter of the house, taking note of every cracked shingle, every loose gutter. I wasn't thinking like a daughter anymore. I was thinking like a guardian. That's when I saw the lights still on in the upstairs bathroom. The window fogged slightly. She was still there. Let her wait. I drove back to my apartment and opened the wine Mom used to save for Christmas. I didn't drink it. I just let it breathe. Like I was letting myself breathe. The next morning, the lawyer sent confirmation, the title transfer had been halted. The auction declared invalid. And then, the first text came. "Claire, what did you do?" I didn't respond. "Claire, we needed the money. You weren't going to do anything with it. Still, I said nothing. Claire, this isn't over. I stared at the last message for a long time. Not because I believed her, but because I knew she believed herself. What she didn't realize was that the fight she'd started was no longer about a house. It was about legacy. Claire had always believed she could maneuver her way through anything, charm her way out of consequences, manipulate her way around structure. But she didn't know what it meant to be still. To wait. To gather. I had never been a fire starter. I was the quiet storm. And she had no idea how long I'd been building this one. The lawyer filed for a formal injunction the following Monday. I requested full access to the property, citing interference with estate proceedings. Claire countered with accusations of harassment. Of sabotage. She even claimed I'd manipulated Mom in her final days. I sent the court Mom's video. That week, Claire's name was removed from the listing. The agent she hired, a smug man in loafers who hadn't bothered to introduce himself to me, sent a curt email withdrawing their interest in the property. The silence after that was deep. Almost clean. Until Claire showed up at my door. No warning. Just her standing in the hallway, her hair unbrushed, coat half-zipped, hands shaking. She said, "You really did this." I didn't answer. She said, "You're going to destroy everything." I said, "No, Claire. You already did." Then I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't lock it. Just closed it. Later that night, I found the photo album Mom kept hidden in her closet. The one with the cloth cover and no labels. Inside, she'd glued the most ordinary photos. Me and Claire at 6 and 7, faces smudged with ice cream. A picture of our father fixing the porch railing. Mom with her hands in the soil, planting rosemary in the corner bed. No captions. No context. But all of it spoke. It said, this mattered. These walls held more than secrets. They held weight. And I wasn't going to let that weight be erased. Some battles are won long before they're fought, in the quiet hours, in the preparation no one sees. I woke at 4:17 that morning without an alarm. No jolt, no panic. Just a kind of clarity. There was no undoing what Claire had tried to do. No apology that could erase forged signatures or calculated silences. But I still had decisions to make. The house was no longer under immediate threat, but it wasn't safe either. I knew how determined Claire could be when she felt cornered. She wouldn't accept the legal setback as final. She'd find another angle. She always did. So I started doing what I've always done best, thinking steps ahead. I set up a meeting with the estate attorney that afternoon. Not the one Claire had used, and not the man who'd helped Mom with the original paperwork. Someone new. Someone sharp. Her name was Evelyn Cho. I found her through a quiet recommendation, and I liked her instantly. She didn't try to soothe or flatter. She asked precise questions and waited for complete answers. She said, "You're dealing with a classic case of interfamily asset control." I replied, "I'm dealing with a sister who believes consequences don't apply to her." She nodded and started drafting. Over the next few days, I gathered everything. I requested a full financial audit of the estate, tracking every transaction since Mom passed. I went through old emails, bank statements, notary logs, and text threads. I flagged inconsistencies. There were many. Claire hadn't just tried to sell the house. She'd dipped into one of Mom's inactive accounts, drained the maintenance fund, and rerouted a utility refund check to her name. I documented everything. Each violation was small, but together they formed a pattern. A trail. A structure built on deception. I met with a forensic accountant Evelyn recommended. A woman named Lizette who moved like a mathematician and spoke in concise, biting phrases. She said, "Your sister's actions suggest intent. You're not just dealing with entitlement. This was strategic." I handed her the final report I'd compiled, a thick file organized with tabs, annotations, and scanned signatures. She flipped through it, paused at the fake notarization, and nodded. "This," she said, "is enough. Not just for court. For leverage." That evening, I returned to Pine Hollow. I let myself in with the old brass key. The kind no one uses anymore. I locked the door behind me and stood in the center of the living room. I took out my phone and began filming. I started in the hallway, pointing out the family markings etched into the wall. I walked through the dining room, mentioning the year Dad refinished the table by hand. I filmed the sunroom, still filled with golden light, and talked about the winter Mom recovered there, reading dog-eared mysteries and sipping weak tea. Then I turned the camera toward myself. I said only what needed to be said. That this house was more than square footage and resale value. That it was not just protected by law, but by legacy. That it would never again be sold behind someone's back. I sent the video to Evelyn. She said, "Let her see this. But don't say anything else. Let her respond in silence first." So I did. I mailed a copy to Claire's apartment, certified, return receipt. A second went to her employer's office. I wanted her to know that I wasn't bluffing. That I wasn't afraid to show people who she really was. 3 days passed. Then 4. No word. But I could feel it, the shift. The way people start walking differently when the floor gets pulled out from under them. That Friday, I met with a preservation consultant. I'd already begun the paperwork to declare the house a historical asset. The process was long, but if approved, it would legally restrict any structural alteration or demolition. Claire would never touch it again. As the consultant walked the property, taking measurements and photographs, I watched from the swing on the porch. The chain creaked softly, but the seat held steady. Everything was moving, slowly, methodically, into place. I hadn't told anyone in the family what I was doing. Not yet. I didn't need their approval. And I didn't need their outrage. This wasn't about justice they could see. It was about control they couldn't take back. That night, I sat with Mom's old ledger. The one she kept for small household budgets, grocery receipts, holiday costs, the names of people she loaned money to and how much. The handwriting had thinned over the years, but the numbers remained precise. In the margin beside the last electricity payment, she'd written, "Anna will know what to do." It wasn't a compliment. It was a responsibility. I didn't cry. I closed the ledger and filed it away. The next morning, Evelyn called. Her voice was steady, but lower than usual. She said, "Claire filed an injunction. She wants to contest the co-executorship." I paused. "On what grounds?" "She claims undue influence. That you manipulated your mother in her final months. That the video was coerced." I felt the air leave my chest, but I didn't panic. I said, "Let her prove it." Evelyn agreed. "She can't." Still, it would go to court. Still, I would have to sit across from her. But I was ready for that. I spent the rest of the day preparing. Not just documents. Not just evidence. Myself. I walked through every room in the house again. Slowly. Deliberately. I touched the walls, the doorknobs, the corners where dust collected and light pooled. And in the attic, I opened the old trunk, the one Claire and I used to hide in during thunderstorms. Inside were blankets, a cracked flashlight, and a photo of us with Dad on the front porch. She was laughing. I was holding his hand. I kept the photo. Not to remember what we were, but to remind myself what she chose to leave behind. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. It would be public. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being seen. Courtrooms aren't built for emotion. They're built for order, straight lines, hushed tones, rules about who speaks and when. But that day, I felt everything. And I wore none of it on my face. I arrived 15 minutes early. Not because I needed the time, but because I wanted her to see me already there. Settled. Unshaken. Claire entered flanked by her attorney, a tall man with a deep part in his hair and that slight condescension some lawyers mistake for professionalism. She avoided my eyes. Her posture was stiffer than usual, as if her own bones knew she was exposed. We didn't speak. The judge was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair pulled tight at the nape of her neck. Her robe moved like a curtain as she entered, and the air shifted immediately. Evelyn sat beside me, calm as always. She wore a slate blue suit and thin-framed glasses, and her presence alone reminded me why I'd chosen her. She said nothing until we were called to present. And when she did, it was with precision. We laid out the evidence. The forged document. The notarization that didn't match state records. The fund transfer from the estate's dormant account into Claire's private savings. The video. And the letter from Mom, handwritten, notarized, dated and signed, specifying joint decisions only. I didn't look at Claire during any of it. Not once. But I felt her unraveling beside me. The slight adjustments in her seat. The way she tugged at her bracelet. The way she leaned in toward her lawyer as if proximity might protect her. Her attorney opened with doubt. He said, "My client is under the impression that her sister exercised coercion in their mother's final days. That the video was the result of undue influence, crafted to shift inheritance control." The judge asked for proof. He provided none. Only speculation, phrased delicately. Evelyn rose and said, "Speculation is not evidence. And intent is not a substitute for action." Then she submitted the witness statement, from Mom's former nurse. A woman who remembered me visiting every week and Claire not once. It was quiet after that. The judge leaned forward slightly and asked, "Ms. Claire Whitmore, would you like to make a statement?" Claire stood. And for the first time I watched her falter. She said, "I thought I was doing what was best. The house needed too much. Anna didn't seem interested in." The judge cut her off. She said, "That is not your decision to make." Claire sat back down slowly, her cheeks blotching with color she couldn't control. The judge ruled within the hour. The co-executorship stood. The forged documents were invalidated. The attempted sale declared unlawful. And Claire was ordered to repay every cent she'd withdrawn from the estate's secondary fund, with interest. The gavel didn't echo when it fell. But something in me did. Afterward, she followed me into the hallway. The air outside the courtroom felt thin and oddly warm. The hum of voices, the shuffle of papers, the clicking of shoes against tile, it all receded behind the silence between us. She said, "You didn't have to destroy me." I turned, not sharply, just enough to face her fully. I said, "You weren't destroyed. You were revealed." Her eyes narrowed. Her voice dropped. She said, "You think Mom would have wanted this?" I didn't blink. I replied, "She didn't leave you the house. She left us both the responsibility. You tried to take more. I stopped you. That's all this was." She didn't speak after that. Just stood there, mouth parted, breathing like someone who'd just surfaced from too deep. I walked away. I didn't look back. Outside, the wind had picked up. It moved through my coat, but I welcomed it. Evelyn met me on the courthouse steps. She placed the final ruling in my hand, embossed, notarized, official. She said, "You're free to proceed with full authority now." I nodded and held the envelope tightly. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just walked to my car, unlocked the door, and sat inside for a long time before starting the engine. That evening, I returned to the house. Not as a daughter. Not as a litigant. But as its steward. The sun was setting, low and honey-colored. The porch steps creaked beneath me the way they always had, but this time they didn't feel fragile. They felt familiar. Inside, the house was still. I moved through each room, noting what needed repair. I took photographs for the preservation application. I drafted a list of work that could begin once the historical designation cleared. In the study, I sat in Mom's old chair and flipped through the mail I'd redirected weeks ago. Buried between insurance statements and city notices was a letter. Handwritten. No return address. I opened it carefully. It was Claire's handwriting. I read the first line. And felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness. Not warmth. But a quiet readiness. Because what she wrote, whatever it was, wasn't going to change the outcome. But it might change something else. Something I hadn't yet decided whether to let go of or hold on to. I folded the letter closed and placed it on the table beside me. Then I turned out the light. There's a particular silence after victory, not triumphant, not celebratory. Just still. It's the kind of silence that makes you hear your own breath, and wonder what to do with your hands now that they're no longer gripping anything. The day after the ruling, I returned to my office like nothing had happened. My assistant gave me a cautious smile, but said nothing about the court date she knew I'd taken off for. That was the unspoken rule of our dynamic, mutual respect through restraint. I appreciated it more than she knew. The case was closed. The estate was secure. The house was mine to manage. And Claire was quiet. Too quiet. I hadn't opened her letter. It sat on the table in the study, unopened, untouched, a folded question mark I didn't owe an answer to. But I noticed the shift almost immediately. Emails from extended family that used to be warm, if infrequent, now carried a certain hesitance. A new wariness in the phrasing. Cousin Julia asked about the garden in her message, but not once did she mention Claire, or the ruling, or the very public hearing that had made its way into the local legal blog. They knew. Or at least, they'd heard. And what they hadn't heard directly, Claire would no doubt supply in her own carefully curated version. Still, I didn't feel compelled to correct or defend anything. Let people draw their conclusions. The truth wasn't fragile. The first call came from Aunt Marlene, Mom's sister. She said, "I just wanted to hear your voice." I waited, unsure whether comfort or confrontation was coming. She said, "I never told you, but your mother used to say you reminded her of herself. Not the young version, the one she grew into." Quietly certain. Hard to shake. I didn't know what to say. She added, softly, "You did what had to be done. Not everyone would have." I thanked her. It was the only phone call I took that week. Meanwhile, the preservation paperwork moved forward. The historical consultant filed the application and confirmed it was under review. It wouldn't be official for another 2 months, but the odds were strong. The house met every criterion: architecture, age, family significance. I started meeting contractors for the necessary repairs. Nothing cosmetic. Just structural safety, weatherproofing, window restoration. The kind of work that honored the original framework rather than replacing it. I found myself walking through the space differently, not like a child visiting, not like a litigant protecting. But like someone building something long-term. Something durable. I chose muted tones for the interior, soft white for the walls, sage green for the doors, sanded oak for the floors. Everything intentional. Everything quiet. Somewhere in that process, I began sleeping again. Not the fitful, shallow sleep I'd lived on since the funeral. But real sleep. Whole nights. I'd wake to early sun against the glass and feel, not peace, exactly, but presence. One evening, I arrived at the house to find a package on the porch. No name, no return address. Just a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a photo. It was from the summer I turned 12. Claire and I standing in the garden. I was in jeans and a t-shirt with grass stains at the knees. She wore a white sundress and crooked sunglasses. We were both laughing. I didn't recognize the photo at first. Then I remembered, Dad had taken it. It had hung on the fridge for years. There was no note. I didn't need one. Claire hadn't spoken to me directly since the court hearing, but this was her version of speaking. She was testing the door, gently, with something she hoped I'd accept. I didn't throw it away. I didn't frame it either. I placed it in the drawer of Mom's desk, alongside old greeting cards and the ribbon she used to mark favorite recipes in her cookbooks. That was the extent of what I was willing to hold. A week later, Evelyn called to let me know Claire had officially repaid the funds she'd withdrawn, nearly $40,000, transferred back into the estate's maintenance account. No note. No acknowledgement. Just the transaction. It was the first time Claire had honored a boundary in years. I thanked Evelyn and marked the ledger accordingly. The next few weeks were filled with quiet logistics. The kind of things that don't make noise but matter anyway: insurance adjustments, city inspections, lawn care. I kept the receipts in labeled folders, noting every expense. One evening, I returned home to find my neighbor standing by our shared fence. An older man, widowed, rarely spoke unless something truly mattered. He said, "Saw the construction truck this morning. Looks like you're bringing it back to life." I nodded. He added, "Your mother would have liked that." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't believe him, but because I did. Some things, I've learned, don't need to be said twice. Later that night, I finally opened Claire's letter. It wasn't long. Just 5 sentences. No apology. No excuses. Just her version of the aftermath, of feeling replaced, of acting from fear. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't offer any. But in the final line, she wrote, "I know you'll take care of it better than I ever could." That's what scared me most. I folded the paper carefully and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumph. Just the hollow ache of a truth finally named too late. The next morning, I took the envelope to the fireplace and watched it burn, not out of spite, not to erase. Just to release. Some things belong to the past. The house was quiet when I returned. But not empty. Not anymore. The rooms were filling, not with people, not with noise, but with intention. And that was enough. For now. There's a moment after the storm clears where everything feels weightless, not because it's light, but because the heaviness has finally settled somewhere that isn't your chest. I felt that for the first time on a Tuesday morning in late spring. The preservation approval came in a pale blue envelope with the state seal embossed in silver. I opened it slowly, like it might shatter. The letter confirmed what I already knew in my bones: the house was now protected. Not just from Claire. From developers. From time, in a way. From being erased. The irony didn't escape me. Claire had tried to sell it for parts. I had turned it into something untouchable. There was a strange, aching power in that. I stood on the front lawn that afternoon as the mail truck pulled away, the paper still warm in my hands, and looked up at the house. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a long, slow exhale. That weekend, I held a small gathering. Not a party. Nothing showy. Just the people who mattered. Evelyn came, along with a few friends from the historical board, the preservation team, and my neighbor who had once shared a fence line with my mother's voice. We walked through the house together. I pointed out the original crown molding, the faint outline of an old fireplace hidden behind drywall, the narrow closet where my sister once hid a stolen lipstick and blamed me. They listened. Asked questions. Took notes. But more than anything, they saw the house. Not as a structure. Not as an investment. But as a witness. That evening, after everyone left, I sat on the porch steps with a mug of tea and watched the light turn amber over the front yard. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel like absence. Just peace. I thought of Mom. Of the way she used to sit in the same spot and fold laundry with the basket beside her, humming something half familiar, half forgotten. I thought of Dad, sanding the railings with his sleeves rolled up and sawdust in his hair. I even thought of Claire, in flashes, in fragments. The way we used to race to the mailbox barefoot. The way she once stood outside my bedroom door, teary-eyed, after our first real fight. The way she stopped showing up in moments that required more than performance. I didn't hate her. I just didn't miss her the way I used to. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the choice not to carry something into the next season of your life. I kept the house keys on a thin silver ring now, one for the front door, one for the shed, one for the attic where time had folded itself into dust and fabric. I didn't sleep there yet. Not every night. But sometimes, when the city felt too loud or too clean or too sharp, I'd drive back and stay in the guest room. Sheets freshly laundered, windows open, the air just a little cooler than I liked. It reminded me that healing isn't linear. That some places break you open just enough to remind you where the hurt lived, and where it no longer does. One afternoon, as I was trimming the edge of the garden bed, I found something buried in the soil. A small, rusted tin. Inside was the time capsule. The one Claire and I had buried at 10 and 11, wrapped in plastic, sealed with masking tape, faded names scrawled in pink marker across the lid. I sat on the porch and opened it slowly. Inside, a friendship bracelet made of yarn, stiff with age. A school photo of Claire with braces and too much lip gloss. A scrap of paper that read, "We promise to always tell each other the truth." I stared at it for a long time. Then I placed everything back in the tin, resealed it, and returned it to the ground, not as a rejection, but as a kind of burial. Of what was promised. Of what never came. Spring became summer. The hydrangeas bloomed late but full. The back steps were rebuilt. I repainted the shutters in a shade called weathered pine. Life didn't pause to congratulate me. It kept moving. Claire never called. Never emailed. Her silence wasn't cruel, it was strategic. She knew anything else would require accountability. I didn't seek her out. Some gaps are meant to remain. In July, I received an invitation to speak at a community event about private historical preservation. I hesitated. Not because I wasn't capable. But because it felt strange to speak about something so deeply personal as if it were just a case study. But I went. I stood in a modest auditorium and spoke about legacy. About homes as inheritance, not in dollars but in memory. About protecting what cannot be built again. Afterward, a woman approached me. She said, "I didn't know anyone else fought to save a house that held so much." I replied, "Sometimes the house is the only thing that remembers what you survived." She nodded, eyes full, and pressed a small card into my hand. That moment stayed with me longer than I expected. It reminded me that grief, when tended to properly, becomes something useful. Something that feeds the roots. I still don't know what the future holds for the house, whether I'll live in it full-time or keep it as a sanctuary. I've stopped needing to know. It stands. That's enough. The porch swing still creaks. The walls still hold the laughter, the silence, the arguments, the peace. But the air feels different now. Lighter. Earned. One evening, as I turned off the last light and stood in the front doorway, I thought of something Mom once said, not during a crisis, but in passing, when I was too young to understand. She said, "The quiet things we fight for, those are the ones that last." And this? This lasted. Because I stayed. Because I listened. Because I didn't leave the work of memory in the hands of someone who treated it like debris. I stepped outside, pulled the door gently shut behind me, and walked to my car under a sky smeared with soft dusk. There was nothing left to take. Only what I'd chosen to keep.